Welcome to Escape the Noise, a podcast about hiking, mental health, and everything in between. I'm Joe Vogel, your host. We're coming to you from the Silicon Slope studio in downtown Provo, Utah. Our guest this week, Ingrid Sorensen. Ingrid grew up in California, but made regular trips back to the Wasatch Mountains growing up. Then in the 90s, she and her husband moved to Provo, where they have lived ever since, and where Mount Timpanogos has been a constant presence and connector for her family of 9. Listen as she talks about how her soul feels at home in the mountains and an incredible discovery she made about the history of her downtown Provo house. So we are here with Ingrid Sorensen today. We're so excited to have you on the show. You were one of the first people that I thought of when we were thinking about putting this podcast together. You have a very interesting, unique story and a connection to somebody that's involved with Timpanogos that we'll get to later in the show. But before we do that, why don't we just kind of talk about your connection to Mount Timpanogos? You did not grow up in Utah, is that right?
That's right. I grew up in Southern California, but I was born here and lived here till I was 4 and then spent all of the rest of my growing up years in Southern California. But we had family here. And so we would come up every year to visit family, and I would see that mountain at the north end of the valley, and it was like a magnet. We would drive on the freeway. I couldn't take my eyes off of it. It's still like that. I'm not a safe driver because I'm always looking at the mountain when I'm driving. And anyway, so it was always this like beacon and this magnetic presence that has always intrigued me.
Yeah.
But I never did spend any time on the mountain until I moved to Provo in 1994.
Okay. So that's, I totally understand what you're talking about because I've spent a lot of time away from Utah. And so now when I'm here and I see that mountain, I feel the same kind of like magnetic pull and kind of connection to it. And I think just it kind of represents something stabilizing, right? It's just like this anchor, right? When you think about, all the changes in life and all the kind of crazy things that happen, it's just like always there, right?
Yeah.
So you moved here from California, what year?
In 94.
Okay.
I came to BYU 1 year, 89 to 90, and then moved back to California. And then my husband and I bought a house in downtown Provo in 94.
Okay.
And that was the first year I hiked Timp.
Okay. So tell me about that first experience.
That first experience was really brutal. I was not well prepared at all. My husband is very fit and active, and he had hiked it earlier that summer and with his brother. And he said, "Oh, it's great. You'll be fine.
Right.
Let's go." He said, "You don't even need to take water because there's waterfalls. You could just drink from the waterfalls." So he went in like June or July. Well, then we went in like late September.
Right.
And there were no more waterfalls. And I was not prepared with a good amount of water. And I was not trained or physically fit. And so it was really hard. I was very excited about the idea.
Yeah.
But it was a really hard experience. He was holding both my hands, pulling me up that last mile. I was taking maybe 10 steps at a time and then stopping to breathe. And despite how horrible of an experience that was for me, I fell in love with that mountain in a whole new way. And I said, I'm never doing this again. I will always hike it prepared and trained from now on. And that was a life-changing moment for me.
That's awesome. Yeah, I think a lot of people like underestimate what a hard hike it is. And so like your first, like even for me, I had hiked it as a kid, like as a teenager. But when I came back from the East Coast a couple of years ago, and the first time I hiked with my son, like it kicked my butt. It was a tough hike, and I think it's close, and a lot of people do it, so people assume it's like, oh, it's doable. But I think you definitely have to prepare, right? There's some training involved, right, to get ready to do it.
Yeah.
So how did you start to kind of better prepare for it?
I spent more time hiking in the summer in advance of a Timpanogos hike. So I would hike the Y, I would hike Rock Canyon, I would hike Slate Canyon. These are all close by. I always had little babies I was leaving home. And so my hiking time was always short.
Yeah.
And sometimes I just put a baby on my back and hike, and made a big difference.
Yeah.
It's not a bad idea to carry 20 pounds on your training hike and then leave it home when you hike Timp. It became a lot of fun after that.
Yeah, I was going to say that's good preparation, right?
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, Timp doesn't really become hikeable until July, so you do get some time, right, to kind of work on these other mountains that are less snowy.
Yeah.
In the spring. So you come back to Utah from California. Maybe back up just a little bit and tell us just a little bit more about you, right? So you have this connection to Utah. You're visiting family here. What does your life look like before moving to Provo, Utah?
My husband and I married in 1990, and we lived in California for 4 years in his hometown of Napa Valley. And then we decided to come to Provo for his job.
Mm-hmm.
And we bought a house on 100 East, this little light green house that had quite a story to it that we had no idea about. But that was the first year. My husband hiked Timp with his brother and then said, "Hey, come on, you can do this. Let's go." And it became kind of an annual thing. And in fact, he even had this thought. He said, "We got to get as many people as we can.
Yeah.
Let's get as many people as we can to hike this with us." So we had 2 little kids at the time and have since added to our family.
Yeah. So let's just dive into the house, right? I'm dying to talk to you about it. So the significance of the house, right, is, and you came to discover this later, is that Eugene Timp Roberts, a legend, right? Somebody that I feel a deep connection to. He's the one that started the annual Timp hike. He's the one that helped establish those trails. He's the one who started the Timp badge tradition, which we've revived at Timpanogos Hiking Company. So he's and he was one of the early kind of influential athletic directors at BYU. Fascinating guy, right? So you live in his house.
Yeah. So it turns out that was Eugene Roberts' house. We had no idea at the time. We even started our annual Timp tradition with a big group of people, always trying to invite as many people as we could, relatives, friends, the youth from the church. Like, come on, everybody, we're going to hike Timp all on the same night. It's going to be great. And we had no idea this was Eugene Roberts' house. We hadn't even heard about this tradition.
Yeah.
But we were doing it.
Yeah.
And a few years later, about 5 years after we bought that house, a woman came and knocked on our door one Sunday afternoon, a very old woman. Turns out she was 88 and she had her husband there. And she said, "I was born in this house. Can I come in?" And we were like, "Yeah, come tell us your story. Like, come tell us some details. We would love to hear about the history of this house." And she said, "My dad was Eugene Roberts, and my grandparents were the proprietors of the Hotel Roberts."
Yeah.
And so the Hotel Roberts was the little tidbit that stuck in my head because that building was still standing at the time too. And I didn't know who Eugene Roberts was,
right?
But I happened to write his name down. Yeah. We took photos with her on our front porch, and I wrote her name and her parents' names on the back of the photo.
Yeah.
Years later, I hear the story of Eugene Roberts, and I'm like, "Oh, that's so cool. Like an annual Timp hike tradition. I didn't know that used to be a thing, but we do that. How fun."
Yeah.
And then I remembered hearing something about him being connected to the Hotel Roberts family. He was their son.
Right.
And then I remembered that we had this photo of this woman who was in that family. So when I pulled out the photo and on the back was written Eugene Roberts' name, it's her dad.
Yeah.
I was like, we live in Eugene Roberts' house.
It's so
like
cool.
The spirit of an annual Timp hike is in these walls.
Yeah.
And somehow it influenced us. And we've had this tradition now for 30 years.
It's an amazing story, honestly. And I can't get enough learning about this guy, right? Like, he's a fascinating figure. I mean, even the Roberts Hotel, I think people don't understand, like, now Provo has this very like clean cut kind of image, but back in the day it was a kind of a rowdy town. And like the Hotel Roberts, from what I understand, had a bit of a reputation, right? And there were a lot of people that came through it, like all kinds of people, right? Like famous boxers. Like, let me just read this little passage from an article on him. So it says, talking of Eugene Roberts, a pioneer of athletic education and a dynamic Renaissance man, Roberts did more than climb mountains. He coached 2 world-class high jumpers and laid the foundation for today's athletic program at BYU. He mingled with early 20th century luminaries such as boxing champ Jack Dempsey, actor Douglas Fairbanks, and football coach Knute Rockne. Roberts brawled in bars, but also wrote poetry. His legacy is a range and degree of excellence rarely achieved, yet Timp Roberts, as he was called by contemporaries, is destined to be remembered best for his connection with the mountain he loved, obviously, Mount Timpanogos. So he, just this really kind of colorful, interesting figure, right? Like all these kind of interesting stories that I've learned about him. How has that been just kind of since you kind of made this discovery, right? That this connection with your house. Like, have you kind of dug deeper into his life?
Yeah, I read anything I can find online, articles, or I think one year his legacy was the subject of a celebration at BYU. Maybe it was homecoming or something like that, where they did a big video presentation about his life.
Right.
I wish I had more accurate facts about that. But I remember looking that up on YouTube and watching it later and really just relishing in that. And I'm always telling my kids, like, when we're hiking, I bring this up, and they're like, yeah, Mom, we've heard you say it lots of times. I'm like, but it's really cool.
I mean, I think there's a very compelling argument to be made that nobody was as influential in, I think his objective, there's a quote where he says that he wanted to bring Timpanogos to the world, right? That he saw it, he had served an LDS mission in Switzerland, right? And that's kind of where he got the idea for the annual Timp hike as a kind of almost spiritual pilgrimage, right? So he brings that back, and then, he went to school at Yale, and he's just picking up all these really interesting influences, and then sees something about Mount Timpanogos that is just special, right? And that he wants to, I guess, share that with people, right? I think that's why I feel the kind of kinship with him. Like, is I don't think a lot of people outside of Utah even know Mount Timpanogos exists.
Yeah, probably not. I feel like it's locally really well known and locally really popular, but I don't know that people come from far away. I mean, I will say that my 2 daughters who live on the East Coast come plan their summer trip to make sure that they're here at a time where they can hike. So
I mean, we have a lot of people, that come into our store that are like, what's this Timpanogos, So I think there's, at least compared to other kind of famous mountains in the United States, I don't think it's as well known, but that's really what Eugene Roberts was trying to do, not only like to share with the world, but also to kind of have people even locally appreciate it, right? Appreciate what it meant. Have you like in your research, like of his life, did you read about like some of those early annual Timp hikes?
Definitely. And looking at some of those old original photographs, like the women are in dresses, the men are in ties. That's just the common clothing of the day. And I'm thinking, wow, you go, guys. Like, that's not what I wear.
We've come a long way with hiking attire.
Thank goodness. But reading about like the original badges, we have a friend who found one of the original badges. I don't know where he got it, but he gave it to my husband one year and said, "Oh, this is kind of your guys' thing. So here's one of these old badges, and that's a super treasure." And then I have one
that you got last year.
That I got last year, and I think you gave me one the year before.
I think so too.
It was my 25th time up the mountain, and I went by myself that time for the first time, which that's something I'd never done before.
Yeah,
and that was. I appreciate that you like commemorated that, which felt like a big feat to me to go alone. And I did do it in the night, at night. So a little scary.
Yeah. No, it is a little scary going up there in the dark. Yeah. But one of his nicknames for the mountain was Wonder Mountain.
Oh, I love that. I've never heard that.
I should have brought this, but I have a book that he helped put together. It's actually more like a pamphlet almost. It's like stapled together.
Yes.
Do you know what I'm talking about?
I read about it on your website.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it's from 1915, around there. It's like 1910s or 20s, around there. But it has all these tributes, right?
Awesome.
Like myths and legends and poetry. And he wrote some things for it, including, I think, the legend that's probably best known about Mount Timpanogos. But yeah, I mean, this kind of idea, I always felt, I used to be a professor, right? And when I was in a class that I really loved, it was because somebody took something that maybe just seemed dry and dusty and made it feel like alive, right? And I almost feel like that's what, a lot of people live here and they see it so much, it just becomes so familiar. But to kind of transform something that's familiar and give it a sense of wonder, I think that's part of his legacy, right?
I love that. And I feel like that's what happens if you hike it.
Yeah.
Because from the front side, you're seeing the west side, it does look kind of dusty,
right,
and dry.
Yeah.
But when you hike the back side where the two most popular trails are,
different world. And
you're kind of face to face with the up close version of Timpanogos, it does come alive. It's not describable. But I think there's a lot of people who relate to that feeling.
Yeah, that sense of wonder.
Absolutely.
Like you can see why he called it that. I think of, even in your descriptions when you're talking about hiking it, that's what it does to us, right? It almost kind of what you said, it leaves you speechless, right? Because there's just so many things that you don't see in ordinary life, right? Whether it's the mountain goats, whether it's the waterfalls, whether it's the views, right? Like you're just the wildflowers, right? You're just kind of taking all this stuff in, and like you said, you can't. It's almost kind of symbolic in a way that you can't really see that from the cities, right? From the valley, it's like It's kind of hidden back there.
Yeah. It's beautiful, and beautiful things happen inside me when I hike it.
Yeah,
that's why I keep going back. I need that like annual reset that it just gives you like perspective, and it gives you this freshness, and it gives you this super up close contact with the wonder of that, that environment.
Yeah. And you've hiked it how many times now?
26 times.
And do you usually hike it every year?
Yeah, I've been every year since that first brutal 1994. Minus any year I was too far along in a pregnancy or leaving a nursing baby at home that I couldn't leave for that long.
Yeah.
It was basically an all-day affair. So I've missed a couple years due to those circumstances, but some years I've gone more than once. And so, yeah, I'm at 26.
And how has the experience changed over time? Is it pretty consistent, like the way you experience it, or do you feel like you appreciate it more now, or is it just kind of different things that you pick up on now?
I think it's gotten easier because I've made a regular habit out of staying fit enough to hike Timp. That's like my why for exercise that I do all the rest of the year.
Yeah.
Is so that when it's time, I'm ready.
Yeah.
And that's been a huge benefit in tons of ways, as far as just keeping me in a consistent exercise habit and the fabulous mental health benefits of having a consistent exercise plan in your life. So it's been an anchor to me in that way too, but it's a different experience depending on who you're with.
Yeah.
I've gone with my husband with different combinations of my children. I've gone just one-on-one with a friend, or my sister and I climbed together once. I've taken people who've never been before. And so you're seeing it through those first-time eyes.
Yeah.
And that's always a special treat. So it's a little different every time.
Yeah.
And yet it's also very reliable as far as its ability to kind of root me and reset me in a way with like some fresh perspective and, just seeing the valley from up there and seeing how far you can see. You can see over into the Uintas and you can see down to Mount Nebo. And there's nothing for perspective like standing on top of a summit. So it's a good thing to do once a year.
And all the effort it takes to get there, right? kind of makes that reward that much better, right?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
I mean, because no matter how many times you've done it, it's still, although you mentioned, I mean, all of your kids or most of your kids hike it, right?
Yeah.
Can you talk about what the experience is like for them? I think you mentioned one of them got up there in like 2 or 3 hours. Is that right?
Yeah. I've got a son who basically runs up.
Trail runner.
He said, well, not really. He's a timp runner. But his theory is that you just kind of fall forward and then put your foot out to catch yourself. And you just do that for 7 miles and then you're at the top. So it's like basically just falling up the mountain. It's really easy, said with all the energy and confidence of an 18-year-old. But yeah, he gets up there really fast. He started carrying a sleeping bag so he can just get warm and sleep while he waits for the rest of us slow pokes to get up there.
That's funny.
So, yeah. Yeah, we've taken almost all of our kids have been up at least once.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I hope you enjoyed my conversation with Ingrid. We'll continue the discussion in our next episode, including why Ingrid feels hiking is such a boon for mental health and why Timpanogos in particular may be a fountain of youth. Thanks again to Ingrid for joining us. You can find her on Instagram at Ingrid Sorensen 9. Escape the Noise is produced by Timpanogos Hiking Co. I'm your host, Joe Vogel. A big thank you to Kai Bradford for his assistance with scheduling and production, to the Wildfires for our intro music, and to Silicon Slopes and Weston Tanner for hosting us and helping us make it all happen. Thanks again for listening. We'll see you again next episode.